Well, whenever your church has a new welcome class or membership class for new members at your church, there are various things you can do that would be interesting and engaging for people in those time periods. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 7 helpful things to cover in a membership or welcome class.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian Androzzi, and with me is Dylan Dodson, and today we're going to give you 7 helpful things to cover in a welcome or membership class.
Yes, churches do it differently. So if you have a membership process or class, or we call it partnership, whatever, or maybe you just have a like a first-time lunch or welcome thing. And I know these things also could be different. Like maybe you have a welcome lunch and a membership class. Regardless, you should share these things in one of these two places.
Somewhere, yeah.
So pizza in the pastor, that's a thing.
Yeah.
Whatever, or with, not in the pastor, with the pastor. Things to cover that it might not. I don't know. Just things that I think that these are things that can be easily not covered. So these aren't like
easily
generic.
overlooked.
Make sure you do like we know to talk about these certain things.
Yeah.
But things that you might not include that are helpful for people, and we do all of these things. And have done them for a while. So
Yep.
we have found these ones helpful. That's why we're sharing them with you.
Yes, exactly.
So here we go. Number 1, start with something fun or interesting. So it can be awkward when you've got people who came after church or who came to a place or whatever, and it's like, how do you begin? Especially, if a membership class or like maybe they're not the most thrilling things in the world.
Sure, yeah.
Maybe necessary and helpful, but it's like, how do you start this thing? So what we do at New City, might not be a surprise for you longtime listeners, is we start with trivia.
Any chance we can get. That's right.
We are trivia people.
Yep.
That's right. And so for our we do. Here's what we do. Maybe I should say this. We do what we call ours our Discover Lunch. We do it once a quarter right now. I mean, you can do it more or less, just depending on your size of your church.
Yeah.
We find once a quarter is helpful just to go ahead and put it on the calendar. It's one of those things that if we've never had this, or we had one time, only one person signed up, and she was great about it. She ended up staying.
Yeah.
But I would go ahead and put these on your calendar proactively, and then when it gets closer, you can talk about it. If no one signs up or whatever, then you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
But waiting, especially if you're a smaller church, to do something like this, people will often respond if there's an opportunity. They probably won't proactively ask for it. So we do ours once a quarter. There's times where people can't come to it, and so I'll have them over and talk through it that way. But our Discover Lunch is about 60, 75 minutes on Sunday after our service. We order pizza and gluten-free pizza if anyone's gluten-free. We offer free childcare as well. And we talk about New City, our values, our beliefs, how to get connected, and that sort of thing. So this is where this happens for us. Cover for you for different places. So for us, we started with New City trivia.
Yep.
And so we ask 7, 8 random questions that have nothing to do with anything. They're just fun.
Exactly.
So we ask things like how many parking spots are at our church?
Yeah.
How many building blocks are in our logo? If you've seen our logo, it's a bunch of the blocks. My middle name. Our launch date, what New City was almost called.
Yep.
A couple other random things.
Yeah, I can't remember what the other ones are, but they're it's not meant to be quizzing them afterwards of what we went over. It's just stuff that really no one's gonna know, and it's just guessing.
Yeah, and it's just funny. It's little
just
fun
for fun.
facts that you don't need. And so we have people sit at tables, so maybe 3 or 4. If you've got 8 people, you can split them up. If you got 6 people, maybe you can split them up. And it gets people talking to some people that are sitting next to them that they might have just awkwardly sat next to the whole time.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it helps, which you mentioned in passing, but to also have to start with food.
Yes.
I mean, I guess I wouldn't even say it depends on when you do it. Just regardless, this is it's all interesting things that we're going over, but it's not always the most interesting things to everybody. And so to be able to eat and I don't know, it just helps people keep people's attention. So regardless of when you do this, if it's at night or after church, I would definitely say have food.
And feel free. Sometimes people send us messages like, "Hey, you said this. Can we use it?" You can use anything. That's how we do this podcast.
For sure.
So do your church trivia. Even if you're brand new, it's if you're portable, what's the name of the school you meet at? People won't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe you could give we did multiple choice. So it's A, B, C, or D. We put on the screen. So it's they can choose. And so you can tweak a letter or a word or a spelling or whatever. So people do, or how long, whatever, 7, 9, whatever ours are. Excuse me. And it's just a fun little way to start.
Yeah, so we make it in I made it a while ago in Canva. You can make it however, but we just put it in Pro Presenter and just save it. So we're not remaking it every time we do it, and it's just you spend a few minutes making it once, and then unless you have an idea of something that changes, then you just use it every time because nobody's seen it before. It's not like you have to create something new every single time.
And the trivia is fun because you're not calling people out, you're not making people say something or whatever. So it's just a fun way to start that makes people in a good mood to want to listen to whatever you're going to say next.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
start with something fun or interesting. We do new city trivia, do your church trivia, and it can, people can like it and they can laugh.
Yeah, for sure.
Number 2, this is a helpful thing. Again, these are things that churches might not think to include. Include the history of your church and keep it brief, like 5-7 minutes. I mean, it's interesting. People like to know. The older you get, or the longer you've been around, you have to share less details and more overview.
Yeah.
Because, we're 5 years in plus, we were 2 years in, you could share more things.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, keep it brief. Even if you're like brand new, it's like, hey, here's, like let's say it's like your first one and you launched 6 months ago. It's like, how did your journey to planting? So like I would share, now people don't care about that as much because we've been around for a while, but I share like Chrissy and I's journey and then New City and stuff like that. And so now we're 5 years in. So we kind of say, here's when we started, talk about our first meeting place. We have some pictures that we show,
Yep.
What things we've been through, just some highlights. And, it's different based on your church history, but I would throw some pictures in there, high level things. People are just really interested in knowing how this thing started. So I don't really know what else to say about that one.
Yeah.
But like, do it, and it's not thought of, but people really appreciate it.
It's people do care, and it's an interesting thing. I think especially obviously if you're listening to this, you are, but especially if you're a church plant, if you're a 100-year-old church, people honestly people probably don't care as much about the history.
I would be fascinated though.
But I agree.
But
a lot of people are like, this isn't like, this is kind of something I can't relate to as much if we're talking, this church started in the 1800s. But if it was just a few years ago, people are really curious about how church plants, because most people have never been a part of one. Yep. Like this isn't a common thing for a lot of just regular churchgoers. And so just give them a few minutes, a few bits of information about it. And I think people are really interested in hearing how things got started.
Yeah. So I think my recommendation would keep it under 10 minutes. Just so it's interesting, but if it's too long, it's too much.
Yeah.
And throw some pictures in there as well. We do this in ours, which we'll talk about beliefs in a second, about a little over halfway through after we talk through like our beliefs, which is kind of like a boring part, unless you're like really fast about those sort of things. Yeah. So we'll take that's not really a break, but then I'll do the history after a drier part.
Yeah.
So it's like reconnects people. So, you can do this wherever, but I think a brief history of your church, how you got there, if you've got community partners, that sort of thing. People are really interested to know how this arrived and how this is here. So
yeah, exactly.
So even if you're brand new, you can just talk about your journey this far and that sort of thing. But throw the history of your church in. Again, I keep it to less than 10 minutes, and maybe you need to practice it out loud so you don't go forever.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But people are just really interested in how the church got there. So talk about it. Number 3, expectations of members. So this one is might be more normal, but also might not be, in the sense of, I think membership classes could be like, here's what we believe, here's how we operate, whatever. For us, we also say, like, if you're a partner at New City, here's what we ask you to do. Yeah. And it's not legalistic. There's certain seasons of life where maybe certain things aren't possible. If you lost your job and you can't give, like, we're not gonna. If you're a single parent or whatever, and the groups aren't working for your season of life, or what, like, there's certainly exceptions. But we have things that we ask. Like, if you're, I'll just say ours. We have a. I don't write it down. We've talked about partnership, membership in the past, so you can look it up. Yeah. About like more of our process, but we ask people to do a couple of things. So you have to be baptized. You have to serve in some capacity, and we talk about what that looks like. It's pretty simple at New City. You have to be part of a group, community group, and you have to give financially. Yep. So those are the 4 things that we ask you to do. Or baptism is only a one-time thing. The 3 things. Yep. We think if you do these things, you'll likely be growing closer to Jesus. I mean, we ask people to go to church regularly, whatever, but it's not something we track. But these are the expectations. Every January, we follow up, and so we always tell them, like, with all of our partners, hey, you're still in for another year. If they're not doing something, we'll kind of ask them about it because they said that they committed to this. And, if there's something going on, we want to help. If they've want to move on to another church, that's helpful too. Like, it's helped us knowing that everybody hears from us in January, because some people who stopped coming or kind of weren't very communicative were like, yeah, we're leaving, or something like that. Which the conversation never would have had, and they just kind of would have left, and it would have been like, what happened? And so it's really helpful. But expectations, like, what do you want? And I would encourage you to think of these if you don't have them. What does it mean to be a member at this church, or what are you asking people to do? Because what you don't want to have people do is come, say, I'm in. They never really show up. You've got like this inflated membership thing, and it's just like, it's not helpful if you want to be on mission together. So talk through, what are you actually asking people to do, and how are you going to follow up on those things?
I think a helpful way to think about it, or the way I think about it, is We have expectations of members, and honestly, our expectation is to do these things, but it's also like just to communicate about these things.
Yeah.
Because like you said, like we're not legalistic about any of it. And other than like, I mean, obviously we want them to be either baptized or working towards it, or something that's like in the near future, like coming up with us. But the other ones, there isn't a single one that we're like, if you don't do this one thing, you're out. But it's like you need to communicate with us about it.
Yeah.
Like if you, like you said, like if you lost your job or something and can't give, then as long as you're communicating that with us, we're not going to be every week being like, did you find a job yet? Or like if you want to serve, but for some reason, work schedules, you can't be there on, I don't know, for whatever reason, and you communicate that with us, then we're not going to just like be constantly hounding. Now we'll follow up down the road and stuff like that. But this isn't like you can't be a member until you do all of these things. And then once you do, then you're in. But it's like, just communicate with us. And we have gotten little to maybe no pushback on these things because we communicate expectations up front. In the class, we communicate it. We follow up with an email that also lays all of it out. It lays all of it out regardless of if they're doing it or not. It's like, hey, here's our expectations. And in some cases, and you're doing all of them, keep going, great job, keep going. You don't need to do anything else necessarily. Or here's our expectations, you're doing a few of them. I notice you're not serving. Can we have a conversation about what that would look like to get you start serving? So some along those lines. And then every January when we follow up, we also reiterate all these things and same thing, like, hey, you're doing all of them. Great job. Do you just want to continue being a partner? Or, hey, I noticed you fell off during this one thing. Can we have a conversation? So we're constantly kind of keeping it in their ear. So there's no like, oh, they're asking me about giving. I've never heard that before. That's a weird thing. I never said that I would do this thing, but no one can actually come back and say that, and no one has. And honestly, all those conversations have gone pretty much just fine. But I think the way the times you're going to get into a little bit of, I don't know, hot water about this stuff is if you don't communicate those expectations up front and you expect people to do it and then you follow up with them and they are kind of like blindsided of why did you ask me to do these things when you never even told me that was a requirement.
Yeah, and it's helpful too, even like right after the partnership, membership, discover lunch, whatever you call it, is we say, hey, your expectations. So when people like, if they're ready to be like, yeah, this is my church, we immediately follow up and say, hey, what's your plan for serving? Or what's your plan for giving? Just so like, they'll, we think through and it actually happens as opposed to like, hey, we'd like you to do these things, but if you want to be a member, just go ahead and do it. And then there's no follow up and then it gets awkward or whatever. So,
and the good thing about mentioning these is in some cases, people will take that, like they'll mention something themselves. Like this past one that we just had a few weeks ago, there's a guy who's not serving and he mentioned to someone that like, as you're talking about serving, and that's one of the things that are, something that we expect. Then he asked about where need is and said he wants to serve in this position.
Yep.
And so now we're having a conversation about getting that started. But if that was never mentioned, maybe he'd start serving down the road, but it would definitely wouldn't have been as quickly because that's not something that we told him was an expectation.
Yeah, so expectations of your members, partners, whatever you call it.
Yep.
And if you have 1 million, then just know that not many people are going to join.
Yeah, true.
But, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you think is healthy for your church. One of the things that we say is, we don't think this is the best or the only way to be a church or to function church. This is how New City functions. And so just be very clear on what they are and be willing to follow up so it's not like ambiguous, awkward thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So expectation of members are really helpful. Number 4, this one is, I think, important and easy to not do, maybe, or awkward, I don't know, is your church beliefs on secondary issues. So you might talk about like the standard, here's what we believe, and like all churches believe those things, but you should still do. Like you shouldn't assume them. We'll talk more about that in a second. But so talk about those things. But we actually have 7. I don't have the sheet in front of me. Not that it really matters. I could probably think of them off the top of my head. Like secondary issues that we are very clear that faithful Christians can disagree on. We have people who are partners at New City who would fall on would fall on like a different space than like what New City would teach or preach on, but they're clear. They know what we tell people, especially why we think Discover Lunch is really important. And every time we talk about it, we say, hey, if you're newer with us or if you've never been, because we'd hate for you to be, one of the things we tell people, I tell them at Discover Lunch, I'd hate for you to be part of New City for 6 months, 9 months or longer and serve or be in a group or be in community and then find out something that we teach or hear something that makes you really uncomfortable or upset. Like, why don't know what they would tell me? Yeah. So I've even had people ask like at our Discover Lunch, like, why do we share all this stuff up front? Because we want you to know. And so we don't just want people to be surprised when certain passages or whatever happens and we preach or teach according to the certain convictions that it happens, but it's not a litmus test how much you're faithful to Jesus. I also tell people before I explain what they are, we'll talk some what they are in a second, that a lot of people like don't think about these things really ever.
Yeah.
And so if you kind of like, we're like, I don't know how I feel about that, but you never think about it. Like, let's not make this a big deal.
Yeah.
But if it is a big deal, then that's okay. And it's okay to want to go to a church where you're really comfortable with like a certain issue and you want the church to be, I get that. And so we just want to be up front. So we talk about men and women in church leadership, creation, the end times, marriage and divorce. Oh goodness, spiritual gifts.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's 7 of them. Oh man,
I'm struggling to remember the other ones too.
Yep. If you post on the Facebook group when this episode comes out on our Facebook group, you can do it.
Yep.
But just like, I'm trying to think. Yeah, that's it. There's 7 of them.
Mm-hmm.
All I know is that there's 7 of them. And faithful Christians can disagree. Oh, baptism.
Oh yeah.
And then there's one more somewhere. How we do baptism here, and yeah, we explain it and we talk through it. And here's where we are. Faithful Christians agree. You can disagree with some of these and still absolutely be a partner here. We just don't want you to be surprised.
Yeah.
Or if you have questions, we can follow up with it. So, secondary church beliefs, I think, are really important not to surprise people. And you just got to be willing to say it because you don't want people to be upset down the road. And I think people really appreciate it. To be honest, I think a lot of people are just like, okay.
Yeah.
Like they don't think about these things. I think for many people, it's about they join a church because they're comfortable. They talk about scripture of the Bible, and they've got community there. Yeah. And I think that's fine. And so not everyone's cares about it. Some people really do. And so wherever they are in the spectrum, you'll get some like glazed faces, like, okay. And I even say this beforehand, like, I know this part's not the most exciting. We just want you to know. But just be upfront and be really clear that you can be really faithful and disagree. And I mean, if you want everyone to go to who's a partner to agree with you on secondary issues, then maybe that's different for us. We're comfortable with that disagreement on those. So I would just, whatever they are, and maybe think through those things and be proactive and tell people.
Yeah, and I think it's good to clearly differentiate between primary and secondary issues.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, not just go through like your main beliefs and then just truck on through the secondary ones without making like a clear divider of here's where we are. If they are truly secondary issues to you, if some of these are like our primary issues, then I got to be honest about it. But if they're truly secondary issues where you're like, you can attend this church, we want you here, and you can disagree, and we don't think that means that you're going to hell because you disagree with this, then be honest that there's a dividing line there, because I think it can be easy to for people to assume that you put more emphasis on certain things than you do. Now, obviously, because it's a secondary issue, you do put emphasis on it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an issue at all. But just be clear that this is not something that, like you said, this is not a litmus test on if you're a believer or not. This is not a determination of your faithfulness to God, but this is just, people fall in different camps in these issues, and this is where we fall, and we just want you to know so you're not surprised. But I think just being clear about the differentiation between primary and secondary issues there is going to, I think, save some people from misunderstanding what you're trying to communicate.
And the 7th one was predestination / free will.
There you go.
So let's see if I can recap all of them. Men and women in ministry, this might not be the right order. Baptism, creation, how God created, all that sort of thing. Eschatology.
Marriage and divorce. Did you say spiritual gifts?
Spiritual gifts and predestination for. Or did I start with predestination for?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Baptism. Did you say baptism?
I said baptism.
Okay.
I don't know.
There.
That's what we're talking about. And honestly, so we have a sheet. We have 2. Here's how we do it. We have our main New City partnership document that I hand out, and I pretty much talk through it. Everything that I say, I add some stuff, is pretty much there. I just talk through it. The history isn't on there. That's not on there.
Yeah.
And then halfway through, when we get to the beliefs, there's a second document that says teachings explained, and we hand those out. And they're all half to 3/4 of a sheet. The divorce one's a little bit longer, remarriage. And it's like 4 pages total. And I just read through it. It's pretty high level, and I'll add a few extra things on those things. And then we just say, like, here's where we are. If you're comfortable with it, just want to let you know.
And on that sheet has, we don't go through and read each one, but also has a scripture reference of like which ones, just in case someone is really wanting to figure out why we believe these things. Like, we don't turn the Bible to read every single one, but does it have some in case they're curious about where to learn more.
So I would just think through in your context, maybe what are some things that people are asking. Yep. Those are the ones that just be honest with them and tell them where you are. So
exactly.
Church beliefs on secondary issues. Number 5, just a little side note, staff and elders pictures. These are a little, not side note, but a little side something.
Yeah.
People want to see, especially if you've got multiple and they're not all there, what they look like. And so we have pictures of our staff, we have pictures of our elders, just so, they may not remember what they look like, whatever, but I always think it's just good to be as proactive as possible. So, we talk about our staff, here's where they are, here's their positions, here's what they do. Here are the elders, they're really great. And I always say this when I mention the elders, I talk about how, like, if you ever have any issues with the church, obviously you can talk to me, you can talk to any of them. If you ever have any issues with me, if I've ever wronged you or did anything wrong or something that made you feel uncomfortable, these are the people that you can go to and we'll talk through that sort of thing. But just pictures of that. If there's any, I don't know if you have ministry leaders or whatever. If you're ever talking about people that you want people to know or just know of, including pictures of them are really helpful. So
yeah, and I think it's good, especially not especially. I think it's good to also include elders with it. I think that people, if they're brand new, they don't know anybody. But if they've been coming for a little while, they probably know. Especially if you're smaller, they probably know who the staff are. Especially if they have kids, they've probably met the kids person.
Or they serve,
or they serve, or they've probably seen the worship leader on stage. They may not know them, but maybe know who they are. So it's good to have the staff, but elders, I think a lot of times people just don't know who they are. And especially if you're a younger, like a church plant, and you're a younger crew, and you have elders that are older, I think sometimes it's helpful just to throw them up there and just be like, hey, this is some of our leadership, so people know, like, hey, this isn't a church that's solely run by a bunch of like 20-somethings, which for us for a time it was, and that's, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's good for people to see that there's a little bit of experience there too, if there is.
Yeah. So we do it in our auditoriums. We have our pro presenter. So we use even if there's different sections of our partnership document, and so even if it's just the text, like it'll say staff and beliefs, and it'll say history. Well, history of pictures too. I don't know. We just change the slide from time to time too. So if you have those, but anything pictures related. So like when we go through our history, I show a picture of our first space, and there's a picture of our meeting in the townhome. So staff and elders for sure, but any other pictures of anything you're talking about, it's always helpful for people to see things and visualize them. So if you got community partners, maybe there's a picture of you serving at the event or collecting supplies.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yep.
So
for
pictures.
Sure. Pictures.
Staff and elder pictures or any pictures. Number 6, again, this one might be overlooked because it might be assumed, but this is like an overview of the gospel. So we've got a page in our thing. We just talk through it. And I know for many people, it's like, okay, I've heard this before, I know. But I also know, depending on your church background and church vocabulary you guys use a lot, a gospel is something that just is said. And many times it can be assumed. And so we read through what the gospel is and who Jesus is and how he's the foundation and how we follow him and all these sort of things. And with that, then after that, we do our church beliefs that are like everyone kind of do the same thing, like Jesus is the only way, the Trinity, created everything, blah, blah, blah. And then we do our secondary beliefs that faithful Christians can disagree on. But I would just include in there an overview of the gospel. And I would have it like written down, not just, however you decide to explain it that day. Even if you explain it pretty similarly, it's just really helpful, especially for people to have something. So this, again, is another quick and easy one, but I would include an overview of the gospel in that. I think one of the biggest things churches run into is assuming. So assuming people know they to give or know assuming they're going to show, like assuming anything, always want to explain it. And if you want people who are trying to figure this thing out or not new Christians, but your whole class is like they know where everything is in the Bible, and it's like, oh, you know this. It's like people don't know this. And so if you want it to seem like, oh, I'm welcome here and I can grow here, you want to have some stuff that's really obvious and explains the basics. And so an overview of the gospel in your thing somewhere, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and the way that we talk about our membership class, like when we're inviting people to it or talking about it from stage, we make no qualifications of like, you need to be a believer for this, or you need to, you have this certain amount of knowledge. And so, like, man, I hope at some points we have non-believers that come to this. And I would hate for them to sit through this whole thing and be like, I know the church thinks about marriage and divorce, but I don't understand what a Christian is. I don't understand what even the gospel is. And so it's like, I feel like it's 100% necessary to go through it. And obviously there's more that can be said. We're not spending an hour talking about it or anything like that. And hopefully it can just lead to more conversations. But yeah, I think just you can get yourself into a little bit of trouble just assuming people already know, and assuming that if someone's in a membership class, they're already a seasoned churchgoer or seasoned, with their knowledge and things like that. But just going over the gospel, and that's one of those things that I don't think anyone's going to fault you over. Like, I feel like that's pretty understanded that you're going to go over that. And so spending some time on that's a good idea.
And we're not trying to like bait and switch people. So we call ours Discover Lunch because it's like Discover New City. And we say you learn about how to join New City Church and what that looks like, but our beliefs, our practices, our expectations. But we also say there's no we don't expect you to sign. You don't have to do anything. You should just come at some point to learn more. And so we do have people who don't know anything really.
Yeah.
That come. Like I remember a couple of times ago, this couple had only come a handful of times. Someone else invited them. No church background at all. And they stayed for the Discover Lunch. And they I felt kind of bad, but I mean, maybe it was helpful. Like, especially when we're going over like the secondary things. I'm like, they don't know it. Like, they're like probably like totally confused on like what these things are. Yeah. And that's fine. I think it also shows people like, hey, this Christian thing is not just like, I don't know, we just sing Kumbaya together. Like, there's actually, like, we've thought through this. There's a lot going on here. And so they definitely were definitely like, oh my goodness, I never like thought of this. As kind of confusing. But you want to, I saw that to say, like, if you say, I'm not saying change the name of it, but I think if you say, hey, we've got our next membership class or our next membership lunch, if you're interested, if you're a new person with not a lot of background, that might be kind of intimidating. Yeah. So I'm not saying change the name, but I'm saying even if you keep it, just explain, this is open for anyone. You don't have to sign anything or do anything. If you just want to learn more, and for us, we've kind of changed the language of like, hey, you should do this, not just if you're interested. Like, you shouldn't be here for a long time and not come to this because, again, we don't want you to get really connected and then find something out that maybe upsets you or makes you uncomfortable or something you disagree with when you could have known. So
yeah, for sure.
So overview of the gospel, really important, or just anything. Don't assume anything in the class. Make it really basic. Okay. And then last but not least, a little fun thing is your meeting space is what I wrote down. Tour of your meeting space, if you can. So this is a fun thing we do. Is if you're portable, maybe you're meeting at your house because you can't, then obviously you couldn't do this. Maybe you could take pictures and do this as well. But our space isn't huge. But at the end, after questions and that sort of thing, we end by taking people a tour because, in our main space, you have the auditorium. We've got some side rooms on both sides, and then the lobby, auditorium, bathrooms. I mean, that's pretty much, on a Sunday, you're all only really going to go into the lobby, into the auditorium, and the bathroom. And if you don't have kids, you're not even going to go to our kids' space, which is on the side of our building. And so you're never going to see it. And so after that, I show them all the offices. It's not that it's like super exciting, but like people feel more at home or like they know where things are or like they've just been around. Yeah. And so we show them, the 2 office rooms we have, our serve team / storage room, show them the kitchen, which is not very exciting, but it's there. And then we walk around to the kids' space. And again, if you don't have kids, you've never been there, because we're pretty, good on safety and that sort of thing. And so like you've never seen a kid space, and our kid space is really cool. And I think especially if you don't have kids, you can kind of forget that that's a thing that people do. Have kids, and that there's a kids ministry that goes on. And so I think that's also really helpful in terms of like getting people to serving kids, because it's like, oh, they don't, especially because of how our space is set up. It's really easy just like to not really see the kids very often if you don't have any. And so walking around, show them a tour of your space. It also doesn't need to be long, but I think it's just people appreciate seeing all the stuff that they've never really seen before, particularly if they're newer, then they haven't seen any of these things. And so give them a tour of your space. People like it.
And don't assume, we said this like for everyone, but don't assume people have seen it all, I guess is the way to put it. Like we have a small space, and we used to have an even smaller space, but no matter what, people have not seen parts of the building. And just a couple weeks ago, this happened. And this guy has gone through membership class, so maybe they jetted out before the tour, maybe just forgot because it was a while ago. But we had a guy who started serving on safety here, and I was training him, and we were just kind of walking around, and we have like basically, if you're just coming to the church, you just walk into the lobby and walk into the auditorium and maybe go to the bathrooms. Like there's other doors, but you don't really ever go in them because they're like offices. But as we were like halfway through service and we were like in the lobby and talking and stuff, he points to one of the doors. He's like, "So what's behind that door?" He's been coming here for like a year probably. I was like, "That's like our office." And he's like, "Can I see it?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, I don't care." And so he's like pokes his head and he's like, I don't think I've ever seen it there before. And it's like 2 steps away from where you walk in. But it just goes to show like people, if they don't have a reason to go in there, they probably have no idea what's even in there. And so give people a tour, show them all the different spaces you can, and people want to see it. But also I would say, because we've done tours for a long time, we used to do tours every week, and so we've learned what doesn't work and what does. Have a plan of like what you're gonna do or say or whatever when you're going through. Now it doesn't need to be like this rehearsed, big thing, whatever. But it can be really easy if you have a smaller space to make it seem smaller or less significant than it is. And that might be a weird way to put it, but to be like, this is our lobby and this is the office, and to make it be like, okay, like this is kind of awkward, but just at least have a little bit of an idea of what you're doing. And so you're not just like kind of aimlessly walking and realize that this tour took 2 seconds and this is really lame, but have a thought, prepare a little bit ahead of time of what you're going to say when you walk people through.
Yeah. And the opposite is also true. We've done tours in the past where like people will take like 15 minutes.
Oh yeah. That's also not
and
good.
You don't like, that's like, people don't want to stay.
Yeah.
And so, don't minimize it, but talk about it, talk about, like, our kitchen's really small, but I say, hey, that's where the coffee's prepped every week, and they bring it out here. Like, it doesn't take a long time. Yeah. But I would also maybe just like your history, like keep it under 10 minutes. Yeah. And if your space is bigger, maybe you're in a school, you got to walk a little bit, like explain things as you're walking, because you don't want people to, hang around for forever. And people, they could lose interest really quickly. But that's a really simple thing to do. Show them a tour of your space, the whole thing. Now, if you're if maybe you've got a large traditional building or a larger building, I mean, that might be harder, but I think still people would like to see it. So just kind of say, hey, maybe give them, hey, this is how long it's going to take. We're going to go quickly. Like when we finish our Discover thing, I say, hey, I'm going to take on a tour if anyone's interested. We're done, so you don't have to stay, but pretty much everyone always stays because it's interesting and they want to see it. So take a tour of your space, and people, even if you think it doesn't matter, people just like knowing where things are.
Yeah, people want to see it. Not a big deal.
So those are 7 helpful things to cover in a welcome and membership class. Again, if you have any questions about any of these things we mentioned, you can always join our Facebook group if you're not there.
Yep.
Practical Church Planting. We do, I always like to say this sometime, we do moderate it. And so, you got to abide by the guidelines. If you're posting, watch my sermon, or here's my thing that I made for churches that will not get approved.
Yep.
Unless it's in the comments, someone asks a question and you've created something that's helpful, then you can post it there. But we will, we decline a good, I don't know if a good amount's the right thing.
A fair amount
of stuff, because we don't want to make it spammy. And if you're new with us, practicalplanting.com, we've got a lot of free resources. We also have a course, Growing Your Launch Team course. You can check that out on practicalplanting.com. And that's it. We'll be with you next week on Practical Church Planting.